Welcome, everyone, to a special Knights of Keira episode of of Cinematic Realms. I am your host, John, and with me, this is kind of freaky. Even though we've been the three of us before, it's two generations of Cinematic Realms co-hosts. I've got welcoming back the wonderful AR. And my latest trusty co-host, Jared. How you guys doing?
Doing really well.
Likewise.
Yeah, so today we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. Not exactly, a little over 20 years, because I was taking a break when the anniversary actually happened, and then we kept having to push this back for various reasons. So around about 20 years. And you know, this is really a thinly veiled thing, isn't it? I mean, we're not really here to talk about Jack Sparrow, Barbossa, Will Turn. No, we are here to talk about Pintel and Rigetti. Clearly. No, this is a Knights of Keira stream. So, and of course, I'm wearing, my Elizabeth Swann shirt. So, we are going to be definitely highlighting Miss Keira Knightley's role in these movies, as would be expected. But yeah, how are you guys feeling about these this first movie in particular being 20 years old?
Old.
I would say it just feels classic, as classic as ever. Like this, what's great about Pirates, and specifically the Pirates like the first Pirates movie, is that it feels like a movie that could have been made at like just this year, and it would be every bit as fresh as it was back in 2003 when it first came out, because it really is it is both a kind of an homage to classic pulp adventure, but at the same time it is one of a kind. We really haven't seen anything quite like it since, even though there have been many imitators. None of them have managed to capture this specific magic. So when I sat down to watch it again last week, I just felt, man, I feel like I'm watching this for the first time, even though it's probably closer to the 100th time.
Yeah, I was reminded of the fact that when I was watching this movie back in 2003, or maybe a little later, whenever it came out on home video, there were parts of this movie where I was like, this movie already feels like it's a classic, as if we'd known these characters, for an entire generation. And then, of course, I'm watching it today, 20 years after the fact, and it absolutely, now it's earned that with the passage of time, but it's still got that wonderful feeling from when I first watched it. How about you, AR?
Yeah, the feeling that you guys describe is actually like why even though I didn't do my homework, I was like, we have to do the stream, because I remember how the movies make me feel, even though I didn't get to rewatch all three of them. But I did get to rewatch The Curse of the Black Pearl, and I like always rediscover the music every time. I know, John, we can talk about that. But it's because I played it in orchestra when I played violin. So, reliving the music alone really brought me back and made me very nostalgic. And so now, 20 years later, I'm still connecting with these characters and still going back to this movie and thinking about it. Like, even after so long, I still remember some of the one-liners and some of the scenes, like they're just like forever there. And I normally move my hands a ton, but Mushroom has fallen asleep on my lap. And I feel really weird because I talk with my hands so much and I keep trying to move, but he's out. So
No, it's really funny that mushroom is. This is a complete digression. Then we're here to talk about Pirates of the Caribbean, and now we're going to talk about dogs. But because as you know, I lost Sam this past year, and occasionally I'll have dreams about both him and Frodo, but last night I actually, maybe it's showing that I really am itching to get another pet, but I had a dream that was actually a really good dream because my mom was actually home with us in this dream, which is always nice after losing her. But the dream was that my dad brought home two little dogs that looked a lot like Frodo and Sam, except they had curlier hair. And and I was like, "Oh, they're so cute. We got to keep them." And he's like, "Yeah, we're gonna see how it goes." I'm like, "We're keeping them." So yeah, I support. You know, I support Mushroom. Intruding on
Yeah, well, he's my official emotional support animal. And so it looks like I'm working right now in front of the screen. So he's like, oh, they are going to be so stressed. I need to be there for them. So they're like, okay, must be on parents' lap, and then goes to sleep.
Yeah.
So,
so back
going back to Keira Knightley.
Yes.
The reason we're here.
Yeah,
although there is a dog in Pirates of the Caribbean as well.
With the keys.
Recurring character. So
this is true.
Yeah. And there's also a ghost monkey.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yes. I love talking about monkeys.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't mean to bring it down, Alan. But it also warms my heart to talk about Sam. He was a cute dog.
I don't think anyone's gonna begrudge us talking about dogs. My family dog Coda is he's out of the house right now because my parents want to make sure he's not gonna bark during the stream, but he's a good boy too.
Yeah.
We love good boys.
So yeah, it was really interesting for me just looking back on this movie and getting that. Obviously, we all love, especially the first three movies, but there is something about this one. I think the fact that it came out during, in 2003. So it's those early years of the 2000s where I'm super nostalgic for everything because those were the years where I was wrapping up high school and Lord of the Rings was out, and it just felt like, the Star Wars prequels were out. It's just everything was like, that period of time is so key to my, what would you call it, my nerddom, and and growing into moving from those teen years to adulthood, and even though high school was horrible, I will say there is a nostalgia for those period of years that I kind of long for, even though it wasn't always the best time. But as far as movies were concerned, it was great. So, and then of course, getting to sort of the real point why we're here, it was definitely the first lightning bolt hit of my crush on Keira Knightley. So, there's no way around that. Those eyes opened, on the screen, and nothing was the same ever since. So I don't know. It's funny. It feels like we've talked about these movies a lot in the past. So I'm trying to think of where to start. Just, I don't know. Help me out. Guys, yeah, it's funny, AR, because we've actually done a stream on this movie before, but I feel like thanks to our wonderful friend Christina, that stream got hopelessly derailed. We went all over the place on that stream, so we can probably focus on the movie with this one. But I don't know. Let's just dive in. I think we know the answer to this question for all of us, but favorite character and why?
Jack the monkey, obviously. No. I mean, the obvious answer and the true answer for me is Keira Knightley as Elizabeth Swann. But I do feel compelled to say that the magic, particularly of this first movie, is the trio, the triumvirate of Elizabeth Swann as Keira Knightley, Orlando Bloom as Will Turner, and and Johnny Depp as the great and temporarily immortal now pirate captain Jack Sparrow. And part of the charm of it is, with movies like this, Johnny Depp's name is first on the poster because he was unquestionably at the time the biggest star of the three. Orlando Bloom was coming off Lord of the Rings, but he wasn't, he was more on the up and comer, and Keira Knightley, this was her breakout role.
Yeah.
But so I would say if you ask most people, they will say that Johnny Depp's Jack Sparrow is the lead. And I know in our hearts we would say Keira Knightley's Elizabeth Swann is the lead. But I also think there's a compelling case to be made for Will Turner as the lead. And then I just end up deciding I just want to set the entire debate aside, because the movie works because of all three of them and the way that they interplay off one another. And and they all have very clear motivations. They all have very clear defining characteristics. And anytime any combination of them is on screen, there's just a different kind of energy. And when all three of them are on the screen, the movie just sings. So this is the kind of thing that, you can write it in the script, but you can't get that magic unless you have exactly the right alchemy. And for whatever reason, this movie just has it. It's a pretty classic trope that, we have our three heroes, probably most famously, at least in my case, set out by the big three of the Star Wars original trilogy and Luke, Han, and Leia. And I feel like a lot of movies have tried to imitate that structure. But, this is one of the movies where they got it. And all three of them they feel like the 3 points on a perfect triangle. And whoever you want to say is the lead of the movie, I really don't think it matters, because this movie is a triumph for all three characters. And then a beautiful cast of supporting characters around.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny to look back on it now because so much time has passed. This really is, you nailed it, Jared. It's one of those great trios of, I can hear Star Wars fans screaming at me. Well, you're one of them, but you wouldn't be screaming at me. But some of them would be to put these three on that level of with like Han, Luke, and Leia. But it's great because it does create that magic on screen when you've got the three wonderful leads who bounce off of each other. And in truth be told, if we are talking about Curse of the Black Pearl, I don't think there's anybody that can dispute the fact that when the movie came out, it was all about, Jack Sparrow. Johnny Depp got, his Oscar nomination for his performance, which, at the time it was like, what? That's so crazy. And yeah, that was a big deal. And and like you said, Orlando Bloom was coming off of Lord of the Rings, and it's funny because I always assume that everybody is as much of a, you know, a quote unquote nerd as I am. I remember I was having lunch with some coworkers, probably the year after Return of the King and Pirates of the Caribbean came out, and I was and I was talking about something. I think I brought up. We were talking about, you know, movie stars and something like that, and it may have been sometime after that because I feel like I was talking about Sean Bean, and you know what it was that we were talking about Troy and the movie Troy, and I was like, oh yeah, Sean Bean, and then they were like, I don't know who that is, and because this person I was talking to, she had always been going on and on about Orlando Bloom, and I was like, well, you know, Boromir from Lord of the Rings, and she's like, I've never seen Lord of the Rings. And I'm like, wait, so how do you know Orlando Bloom? And she's like, Will Turner, Pirates of the Caribbean. I'm like, oh, okay, that's right. So this was a big deal for him as well. And then, of course, you know, like you said, this was Keira's big breakout success. She'd been in Bend It Like Beckham before this, which I feel like for a different audience, like that was their introduction to her. But this was just huge. So yeah, it was great for all of them. It's all, but in the context of the larger trilogy, I have no problem whatsoever saying that Elizabeth Swann is the main protagonist of Pirates of the Caribbean. What say you, AR?
I don't mean to poo-poo your question, but every time I hear the favorite character, with this movie, it just doesn't apply. I think of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms and from a Ming Dynasty tale that's about an earlier dynasty or an earlier time in China when China was the Three Kingdoms period, and there were three of them. And there was this one guy who says there are three guys fighting, and one of them has two best friends, and they make an oath under a peach tree to have eternal brotherhood. And all three of them, one is like known for his martialness, and then the other guy's known as the leader, and then the last one is known for his cunning and his battle strategies and his intelligence, right? And you have this like the three musketeers. I mean, like I could go on and on about this idea of these three coming together and being kind of like the perfect team somehow, you know, like they fill in each other's weaknesses, right? And so luckily he's now fallen asleep on my other arm. So now I can use this arm, which is very nice. Thank you, Mushroom. That was very nice of you. And so I think going back to the idea of the protagonist is that if you're talking about the hero's journey, all three of them have a hero's journey. And so in the end, I think the movie, you can look at it as being about questioning who is really the hero and having three heroes' journeys and kind of deciding for yourself, you know, who is the one driving the action? Well, all three of them. They're on three separate paths that happen to be parallel to each other.
Yeah, and it is really beautiful the way that's all structured. Although and they're on different kinds of journeys as well. What I like about, what I love about Jack Sparrow is that in a lot of ways, though, we do go on a journey with him, and he'll sort of learn things about maybe playing well with others, among other things. But he does kind of arrive in the same place that we find him at the beginning of the first one, which I kind of love. I love that he's the character that, yes, he changes, but he also doesn't change. And that's what's beautiful about that. And both, I think Elizabeth and Will go on those very traditional, hero's journey, arcs, which is great. And it's funny because if you had, in terms of like the overarching trilogy, if you had asked me back when this first movie came out, And I don't think I'd yet processed like how much of an effect Keira had on me. But if you ask me like what kind of sequels that I would have wanted from this movie, I would have said something in the style of Indiana Jones, where it's like a different adventure for each movie and maybe a different cast, and the one sort of singular element would be Jack Sparrow. And what's funny is we kind of got that with the other films, and yes, they weren't as well made, but also it kind of showed me that that's not really what I ended up wanting after all. I wanted what they gave us, which was a beautiful overarching story with the three of these characters, as well as a number of other characters. So I love that ultimately they went the way of building out a larger mythology for this story, and the fact that we got to go with these characters on this huge journey, even as, you know,
I think I have a poltergeist.
You losing some power.
Well, everything is fine, like the Wi-Fi and stuff. So I think it's just the light. Yeah, sorry everyone. I'm having some paranormal experiences over here.
Well, this is the franchise for it, because there's no shortage of paranormal elements.
And it's funny, what I was going to say is ultimately for this, you know, even though it's great to go on this long journey with like the characters Will and Elizabeth, by the end of the trilogy, it ends up very sad and bittersweet. Of course, we do have that scene in number 5, which, you know, the ending of number 5, which might be the only part of the movie that I like. 3 guesses as to why. But within the confines of that original trilogy, it does kind of end on this sad, bittersweet note, and you know, but it's beautifully done, and I love that story, and just the time they took developing everything. And it's a weird, also something I was thinking about as I was going back through like the highlights of the other movies as well. And I think we talked about this previously, or I know I had definitely got into it with Christina when her and I did the discussions on parts 2 and 3. But this is a weird movie series, especially with the later movies, where, you know, there's just all kinds of weird stuff, culminating with a large, you know, 50-foot woman who, you know, turns into a bunch of crabs. And I just sort of love that. At the time, I was like, oh, that's really odd. Not sure if I'm, you know, into that. But now, as I've gotten older and I've seen a lot of movie franchises tend to play it safe and, you know, sort of give what the audience expect, I applaud a movie series that it is as out of the box as this one is. That whole dream sequence, or not dream sequence, it's like it's Jack in Davy Jones' locker in the beginning of part 3, where he's just seen all those different versions of himself. And then later in the movie, where he's like, you know, I forget what he says exactly, but something to the effect of like, where's my brain? And there's just some very outlandish stuff with these movies, which is great too. But yeah, so going back to, you know, Curse of the Black Pearl, it's not only do you have those 3, but of course we have the character of Barbossa, who is just brilliantly played by Jeffrey Rush. And I love how over the top he is. There's, you know, that part where, you know, he's chasing Elizabeth around the room, which is the knife, and he actually goes, "Arr!" And then we got Jack Davenport, Jonathan Pryce. You know, I'd have to pull up the actors' names, but who play the pirates Pintel and Rigetti. And then
Lee Argenberg and Mackenzie Crook, the latter of whom was also Arel in Game of Thrones.
Yes, he was. And and then their counterpoints working for on the British side, who have that whole back and forth in the beginning about I said no lies.
Yeah,
it's just such a wonderful cast.
Yeah, and it's like a magic quality to it, which you mentioned that specific scene where the Jack Sparrow confronts those two kind of mildly incompetent British soldiers in front of the ship. And I actually had gone back and read the script for this movie because there was a time when I could quote every single line from this movie verbatim in order with no mistakes. But you see like the kind of the added element that gets breathed into the character from on the page, because in that scene, they confront Jack and they say this dock is off limits to the civilians, and Jack's line in the script is, "Sorry, I didn't know." And then you go to the finished product, and what does Jack say? "I'm terribly sorry, I didn't know. If I see one, I shall inform you immediately," which is an iconic line and delivery. And I don't know if it was improvised by Johnny Depp or by the team on set, but like that just is the kind of magic that you can only discover during the filmmaking process. And they needed that magic because I think I'm glad you brought up the fact that this movie series is so weird, which I love about it. As I think, I love my pulp adventure stories, whether it's Star Wars or a franchise like this. But what's another reason that this movie is such a beloved classic is it could have so very easily been an unmitigated disaster. And before this movie came out, that's what people thought it was going to be for a multitude of reasons. One being that after having a good run back in like the 20s and 30s with Errol Flynn, and then Peter Pan and everything in the 50s, pirate movies really didn't work. There were a lot of notorious bombs leading up to this. Disney didn't think that this movie was going to work, even though it was based on on their famous ride at Disneyland, and it's actually, I was doing a little bit of reading about it before the stream earlier today. If you notice, the Disney logo is actually not in front of this movie, and it is for the latter movies, but that's because they were so not confident in it that they didn't necessarily want their brand on it. Another reason being that this is the first movie from live action Walt Disney Studios ever to be rated PG-13. And it has to be because, it's not only is it about pirates and gets into kind of some of the more unsavory aspects of their nature, but it's got like elements of straight up horror. And they're things that like you would not necessarily expect to see from the studio that brought you, like all of the beloved animated classics for kids. So it was a huge risk, and hiring Johnny Depp as the lead was a risk. Hiring, this complete unknown Keira Knightley as the lead female was a risk. And most people expected this movie to bomb at the box office. But, I feel like we hear this all the time about movies that are later become beloved classics. Like, oh, the production was so crazy, it was almost a complete disaster. But that's how the magic is found, because if they weren't taking those risks, they never would have found what this movie has, which is just its like pure like alchemy, magic, whatever word you want to describe for it. They took that chance and it paid off like gangbusters. And this first movie it's one of the few movies that I would apply the label of perfect to, not because I think it's flawless, but because I think it is a perfect example of the kind of story that it is trying to tell. And I love 2 and 3 as well. I kind of feel like because the first movie was so risky, and because it, delivered so much, some of the quote unquote flaws of the second and third movie, we'll leave the fourth and fifth ones aside for a moment, are because they hit such a big home run with this first one. They were effectively playing with house money. They're like, you know what? We can do whatever the hell we want, and they do. And like the fact that they go ahead and make like two movies that are almost 3 hours long, featuring an abundance of characters that look like mutated fish, and and it works. Another testament to the genius of this series.
Yeah, just like we take it for granted now, but this is our villain for for parts 2 and 3. It's like, which, by the way, we need to highlight the amazing visual effects of these films, which and even part 1, which was in 2003, which I was watching. I was astounded because that's 20 years ago, and I'd say that the effects in this movie look better than the majority of stuff we get today. It's just absolutely spellbinding. I think it's some of the best work that ILM ever did. But it's funny you said hiring this unknown actress Keira Knightley. What they probably didn't anticipate is everybody just assumed it was Natalie Portman.
Yeah,
not without reason. We joke that this was the first movie that we really got to fell in love with Keira Knightley, which it was. But it is notable that the first movie that I ever saw Keira Knightley in was Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, where she played Natalie Portman's decoy queen, Sabe. And of course, I didn't know that at the time. And to be honest, Keira Knightley barely seems to remember being in that movie. But
it always breaks my heart, because it's like, but they've developed this really great character for you. I'm always like, whenever I listen to those interviewers asking her, it's like, tell her about the books and the comics and what's going on with her character. She might become interested in potentially reprising that. But then she's like, yeah, I don't remember if I was even a character or if I was just Natalie's stand-in. So anyway, digression aside.
Yeah, great character though, and it was a great opportunity. Especially, as you mentioned, she was also in Bend It Like Beckham the year before, which was released I believe in the UK the year before, but also came out in the US around the same time. And like, what a double feature, because that actually, I feel like it was the combination of those that really kind of like set her on her current path, because it would have been so easy for her to become stereotyped into these types of roles, and she just refused to allow that to happen. Yes, she has her fondness for British period pieces, but she always makes sure it's a British period piece where she's not just playing the demure damsel in the fancy dress. She always has a tremendous strength of character, perhaps best embodied by another favorite of ours, the 2005 Pride and Prejudice. But it all started here, because Elizabeth Swann could have been such a generic character, and Keira Knightley makes her anything but.
Yeah, and funny that's like her breakout hits were Bend It Like Beckham and Pirates of the Caribbean, because in both of those cases, I think she thought they were both going to be complete and utter failures, because the first movie was called Bend It Like Beckham, which she said she dreaded telling her friends that was the title of the movie she was doing. And then Pirates of the Caribbean, like before it came out, they just sounded ridiculous. Like, oh my God, this is going to be such a bomb. And then of course, they end up propelling, her career forward, so that then she ends up getting Pride and Prejudice, and then it just takes off from there. Of course, there was a movie in between that, AR, which was
I was just about to say, don't you forget King Arthur.
How could we ever?
Yeah, seriously.
No, I mean that seriously. I love that movie. So
Yeah, no, it goes along with what Jared was saying about kind of choosing a character who is independent and strong within a society that, oh my gosh, is a patriarchy. Drink. And she always has some, like, I would call it kind of wiggle room for creating a path for herself. And all of her characters have that strong will. I think of Colette's, right? The strong will to write and to create fiction. And then in Duchess, the strong will to persevere despite infidelity and disrespect from one's husband. And I think that Elizabeth Swann is someone that you look at and you think, okay, she propels the plot forward by getting kidnapped, and that's it. And that would be, like, I would say, a very reductive way to look at the way that this plot works, because it's different from when the damsel in distress is, there. And I think that we see genuine fear on her face, but we also see genuine resilience as well. And ingenuity as well. She's very clever.
Yeah, and just really quick, because, I couldn't not do this, but since we mentioned King Arthur, there we go.
Yay, thank you. You see why she was a part of my bisexual awakening. For the plot. That's the reason I watched that movie.
Yeah, that was, let's just say I didn't know who the heck Clive Owen was at the time that came out, so it certainly wasn't, it wasn't for him. This was coming off Pirates of the Caribbean, and it was a King Arthur movie, but Keira Knightley was going to be in it, and I'm like, yeah, let's go see this. Which then, of course, I've talked before about my thinly veiled, way that I went about seeing Pride and Prejudice, was that I had, truthfully, and I will never stop feeling guilty about this, forgotten my mother's birthday and not gotten her a birthday card. And then I was like, oh, but she loves those, Jane Austen movies. It was like, let me take you to go see this movie that's out, Pride and Prejudice. Knowing, of course, that I wanted an excuse to go see it anyway, because Keira was in it. So, so yeah. But it's so great how it is a part that starts off, kind of playing into those tropes, but just the way she plays it and the way the character is written, it's showing you that there's a lot more to it than that. And then especially over the 3 films, the way she develops, it's so great that, I picked up on little things like, Barbossa says, you must be a pirate for the pirate code to apply, and you're not. And then by the end, she's the freaking pirate king.
Yes. Yeah. I was just going to say, you were talking about the tropes, and I think a lot of these, at least, the first 3 are very much a satirical play on pirate movies itself. They play into the tropes and play with the tropes. And I think also something that is very refreshing about it is that it's not a glorification of piracy, but it's not a condemnation of piracy. It's kind of a jaunty treatment of breaking the law, So it's interesting to think that it came from Disney. And it's also interesting to think that it was a movie that few people kind of believed in. And it is also a movie that I think, because the expectations were that it was going to flop, I think then for it to have this magic is just more of a testament to, you know, the vision that they had. And while the vision might have gotten a little foggy toward the end, I think that propelling each of the three characters forward was the right way to write these movies.
Yeah.
It is kind of like one thing that kind of gets lost, and they're not really lost, but the fact that, you know, the first three movies have the same director, and I believe the same screenwriters. They're all directed by the first three are all directed by Gore Verbinski, and they believe it's is it Terry Elliott and Ted Russo are the screenwriters. Yeah. And they're all produced by Jerry Bruckheimer, who really believed in this project. The whole reason this project got off the ground is because Jerry Bruckheimer believed in it and kind of helped shepherd it along. But I kind of feel like that consistency is what allows those three movies to become such, you know, to have that kind of, you know, continuing magic, because, you know, at least through the first three, you know, they are telling a pretty consistent story. Like, the first movie works beautifully as a standalone film, but the second and the third were shot back to back with a joint story in mind, and they kind of managed to bracket everything off in a very beautiful and effective way. And I think that having that level of trust, you know, from having done it, you know, that many times, is kind of what allows them to, you know, find the characters like natural evolution and grow. We mentioned that all three of them have their own kind of element of the hero's journey, but they're different. You know, they take different routes. Jack, I think, you know, his arc is the idea that, as Elizabeth talks to him about in that memorable scene in the second movie, like him learning to become less selfish, to discover the good man that ultimately is under the veneer of, you know, the pirate who cares only about himself. And for Will, it's weirdly almost the reverse, because he starts out as a very like morally, you know, strident character who has a very strong belief in what is right and wrong. But by the end, he is willing to do very, you know, underhanded, one might say dastardly things in the name of, you know, trying to protect those he loves. But he never loses that core star of his loyalty to his family and his friends, both for his undying love for Elizabeth and later his intense loyalty to his father, Bootstrap Bill. And for Elizabeth Swann, her arc is, you know, essentially fighting for freedom, for her own freedom and right to self-determine. You know, we mentioned, like, by the end, the pirates are almost portrayed as freedom fighters versus, you know, the kind of the tyranny of the East India Company, which kind of serves as a proxy stand-in for the British Empire. And, you know, Elizabeth, who grew up in privilege as the daughter of the governor of Port Royal, a very, you know, quintessentially British institution, with her life planned out for her. She's supposed to marry the high-ranking Commodore Norrington and kind of just be the tame, docile housewife, and that's not what she wants with her life. And as you mentioned, she ends up like finding her way to becoming the Pirate King, and we get to see that while she chafes against the roles and expectations, the kind of the stiff gender roles that are put on her, she doesn't chafe against her own femininity. It's never like, she's never like, I wish I was not born a woman. She like wants to, you know, find her own place, you know, in a world that's not ready to let her have her own place. And ultimately she does. But she also never loses her loyalty to her friends, her family, and in particular, her love for Will, which really forms the consistent through line throughout the trilogy. You know, there's an element in the second movie where we're meant to think is Elizabeth possibly falling a little bit for Jack Sparrow. But I think what the movie makes it clear, and the third movie reaffirms, is that she's not in love with Jack. She's in love with the idea of what Jack represents and what it could be for her. And by the end, she has indeed claimed that as her own.
Yeah. I definitely want to follow that up, but real quick, just because before you mentioned about Jerry Bruckheimer being involved in the production of this. So I just wanted to point out once again what you said earlier about none of the logos are in front of the first movie. Like, not even Disney's logo isn't up there, but neither is like a Jerry Bruckheimer production. Like, that's not there either. So I think like everybody involved in the movie was playing it really safe. It's like they certainly by the end knew that they had a really good movie, but it was still a pirate movie. And and so there was no evidence that it was going to do any good. So I think they were all playing it safe. I just remember sitting in the theater and being like unsure if the movie was actually starting or if it was another preview, because there was no sense that you didn't have this feeling like, oh, the movie is starting. It just all of a sudden there's this smoky screen, and then slowly the Pirates of the Caribbean title comes up, and you're like, oh, okay. But yeah, no, incredibly just well said, about Elizabeth's character. And I just love that she has such, we talked about all the characters kind of go on a hero's journey. And I'm biased in this regard, but but I have always found Elizabeth's to be the most satisfying of those journeys, just because it's just amazing to see her go so far. And there's a scene in the first movie that I love, because it's kind of teeing up where she'll eventually go, but it's when the pirates are breaking in, and she, and the music is ramping up, and she goes for the sword up on the wall and just to pull it out, but that it's part of the decoration. So she can't actually pull it out, and then the music just kind of dissipates. Like, no, she's not going to have her sword fighting moment here, but she certainly gets it as the films progress. And yeah, it's just absolutely wonderful stuff. And yeah. So.
I think something that's consistent too is we haven't quite mentioned the choreography yet. And the fight scenes are consistently some of the best and most innovative that I've seen. I don't remember which movie it is, but it's when they're in, I think it's the beginning of the second movie, when they're in a wheel and they're fighting while moving in this big wheel. Yeah, there we go.
It's towards the end of the second
towards
film.
the end of the second. Okay. And that's something that's stuck with me, even though I didn't do my homework and I didn't rewatch all three. I remember this particular scene very vividly because the choreography being so impactful, and also kind of being all encompassing and exciting. And in the end, it really gives you a feeling of danger, but in a fun way. And that's kind of what the ride is trying to do. So, it gives you that like jaunty kind of feeling, but like it is a little serious when the fights are going on. You're like, oh, someone could actually get hurt. But then there's like all these like one-liners and silly things that happen that just make you kind of remember the brand and remember that the movie has this, it doesn't take itself too seriously. And it specifically, it kind of wants to show also that a kind of comedy of errors, really, of these three characters, and they are characters, and that they are, you would call someone, wow, that's a character. Everyone constantly talks about Jack Sparrow as being this very memorable character. But I think, Will finding out that he, even though he detests pirates, that he is a pirate. I mean, that's the classic, like, the hero, like not liking, not wanting to be in power, and then becomes in power. And you also get people that do want to come into a power and they really earn their spot, like Elizabeth Swann. And then you have Jack, who was fallen from power, right? He had his crew, and then he fell down from power. And then you have Will, who kind of is loyal to his father, but then finds his power kind of within himself as well. And so all three of them kind of discover a part of themselves that they thought was never there or was dormant.
Well said.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and yeah, it is great that by the end, like, Will goes from, when Jack says, "So you want to turn pirate yourself, is it?" And he goes, "Never, never." And then, of course, by the end, what does he end up? He's, the captain of the Flying Dutchman. Yeah, God, it's just so wonderful. The way the story goes, and talking about that.
Up. There we go. Look at his face. He's like he just woke up from a nap. Oh.
Hey, Mushroom.
Wow. Good morning, sleepyhead.
Oh.
Good morning. Okay. He's doing okay. Yes. Oh, he did a big yawn.
Oh, yeah. No, I used to love my dogs. They just do that, big yawn, opening the mouth real wide, doing.
Yeah. It makes me yawn often. We'll make each other yawn.
But no, you were mentioning the fight scene on the wheel, which brings us to like another great character in these movies, which I mentioned earlier, which is James Norrington, who's great. I love the path his character takes in the second movie, where but he's and he's got so much great humorous material in the second movie, even though it's like his darker turn. But I just love the fact that he has 0 F's to give in that movie. He's kind of dispensed with everything, where like the parts where he's telling that's like it looks like Elizabeth has kind of a thing going on for Jack at certain points, and he's just like leaning back. He's like, there was a time I would have given anything for you to look at me like that.
Yeah.
He's just dispensed with all the sort of proper decorum. Jared, are you still there?
It would appear we have some gremlins, some IT gremlins going on.
Yeah. Oh,
hey there.
Hey.
Oh, hey, we missed you.
I missed you guys too. I was annoyed that it was started cutting out right as you were starting to talk about James Norrington, because I actually really wanted to talk about that character, but hopefully I didn't miss too much.
Yeah, no, just mentioning about how he is so laid back to the point of being funny in Dead Man's Chest. And also I have to say, I was looking up the cast members in this, and it's really funny, this thing you go through when you see a movie when you're younger, and characters are always sort of like cemented in your mind of, I was a kid, these characters were adults, and I looked, and Jack Davenport was 30 years old when he starred in the first Pirates of the Caribbean, and I'm getting ready to go on 40. I'm like, no, Norrington is still older than me. What are you talking about? But go ahead. I'm going to let you go, Jared, since you wanted to talk about Norrington.
Yeah, no, it's another testament to how great these movies are, that like Norrington is maybe the 6th or 7th most prominent character throughout the first 3 movies, but he also has a fantastic arc of his own. Like I in the first movie, he really is kind of a little bit more, not a villain, but an antagonist. He is he definitely doesn't like Jack Sparrow. He is a rival for Elizabeth's affections, even though she only has eyes for Will. But he is ultimately still a heroic character. But then we see kind of what that strong kind of determination to do what's right costs him in the second movie, where he is determined to bring Jack to justice, and it costs him his ship, his crew, his commission, his life, in his words. And we find him in a very kind of dark and down place in Pirates in Dead Man's Chest. And that's a lot of fun, I imagine, for the actor Jack Davenport to play, because he gets to play almost a completely different character in Dead Man's Chest. But he holds his own. That sword fight with him and Jack and Will is one of the highlights of the movie and the first three. And at the end, he kind of wins at the end of the second movie. He makes off with the heart and with the leathers, and kind of leaves our heroes up the creek without a paddle, as it were, and kind of gets himself restored. But in the third movie, when he finds he has everything he thinks he wants again, and he starts to realize that that's not actually what he's not serving the side of good that he thought he was. And there's that moment where Elizabeth kind of challenges him. Did you know what side you chose? Well, now you do. And then he makes that choice to to set them free and to let them escape. And there's an absolutely beautiful moment on the, right before his death, where he's letting them go. And Elizabeth knows what this will mean for him. And she kind of just softly says, come with us. James, come with me. And it's the first time we hear her use her name in that way. And ultimately he decides not to go with them, a decision that costs him his life. But it's the moment where you really see what his true north was. He did love Elizabeth. He thought romantically at first, even though she didn't return his affections. Ultimately, he still does love her, and he sacrifices his life for her. And at the end, when he's kind of lying there dying, and Davy Jones offers him the question, do you fear death? And he tries to take him down, even though he fails. And and Davy Jones I'll take that as a no. And it's and then that's the end for his character. But I feel like it's kind of easy to get lost in the shuffle of everything happening, and especially in the third movie, which is so huge and so epic. But the more I rewatch these movies, the more I appreciate just what a great arc it is for Norrington as a character, and how Jack Davenport manages to portray him as this ultimately good man who finds himself making moral compromises to the point that he could have lost himself entirely, but in the end he does not. He finds a way to save himself and save those he loves, and and make sure that they live to fight and ultimately win. And I think it's a rather beautiful grace note for his character. And when a movie franchise can do that for its, again, 6th or 7th most important character, that's just outstanding.
Yeah, I remember feeling mixed about his arc in the third film when the movie first came out, because he had a lot to do in the second movie, and it did kind of feel like he got a little lost in the shuffle in the third movie. But I think you're right when you look at his arc as a whole. And I also have to remind myself that not every movie franchise is the extended edition of Lord of the Rings, where every secondary character is going to get a super fully fleshed out story in each movie. And so I actually think the fact that they did allow this character the resolution of an arc in the third film, he's just not there to play a part in the big showdown of the movie. The role that he plays there enables other characters to go on. And so I think that that's an important part that he plays. But more importantly, when you take in his arc for the full 3 films, I think it does feel complete and satisfying. So I just, I wouldn't have minded some more of Dead Man's Chest Norrington, where he was kind of off the leash a bit. But, if we had gotten like the, 3-season series version of Pirates of the Caribbean, we could have gotten that. But at the end of the day, even though at World's End was almost nearly a 3-hour movie, it's still like, when you get towards that climax, you do want the emotional through line to be about it's Jack, Will, and Elizabeth, and those 3 characters. So yeah, to then have Norrington, like, say he had sacrificed himself later in the movie, potentially that could have gotten things a bit muddled, because you want your emotional beats at the end of your final film, or what at the time was the final film, to be related to your central characters. And so, yeah, it's just the way that goes structurally, when you're writing this stuff. So now I rather like where his character ends up. I think it's satisfying. Anyway, so we've hit the hour mark. So let's we'll go ahead and quickly do the mid-roll.
Which means I'm going to have a bathroom.
Yep. So next week, for those who, first of all, I didn't mention this at the beginning of the stream, but we were supposed to have this discussion last week, and we had to push it back, so we just didn't have a stream last week, which I feel like it was nice to have a break anyway. But as a result, so we're doing this stream this week, obviously. Next week, we're coming back with the third part of our discussion on the Disney Plus series Ahsoka.
Yes.
Which, like, I cannot wait to see how that whole thing wraps up, Jared, because I am just in love with this show. I haven't been on social media to see like how it's being received, but I don't give a crap, because my DT heart has just been so like over the moon, with this, and there's so many things like that I want to talk to you about, but we're going to save that for next week. But yeah, so we'll be talking about the final 3 episodes of the season, the last one, which is set to air this coming Tuesday, which I can't believe, like, didn't the show just start? It's gone by so quickly. So, yeah, I know you're not the biggest, like, you're not super into Star Wars a lot. So would I be wrong, AR, in guessing that you haven't watched Ahsoka?
No, I have not. Is it animated or live action?
It's live action.
Okay.
But it
No,
features
I have
characters
not.
that appeared in animation. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, my fandom, I tend more towards Star Trek, but I don't feel like they have to be competing. I think you can like both. But yeah, I'm excited for you guys. The way that you guys get excited about it is why I would watch the stream of you guys talking about it.
Yeah, speaking of Star Trek, I've actually been watching a bunch of the new Trek stuff. Well, newer, because now it's not new, but it was new a couple of years ago. But I'd just fallen behind so much. I've watched the first 2 seasons of Discovery, and I'm on the first season now of Lower Decks, which is the animated series. Enjoying the heck out of both of those. But now that I've finished season 2 of Discovery, I kind of like am itching to just cut straight to Strange New Worlds, which picks up with the characters of Captain Pike and Spock and Number One, because we got those characters in season 2 of Discovery. But I'm sticking to air date order, so I'm going to finish the next 2 seasons of Discovery before I move on to Strange New Worlds. but I've been enjoying the heck out of that, and it's sort of rekindled. Not that I ever lost it at all, but it's definitely rekindled some of my love of Star Trek. So, but yeah, before we get back to the discussion, I just want to mention something that Jared and I have brought up for the past couple weeks. Is obviously, even though one of them has been resolved, there has been some things going on in Hollywood with the strikes. The WGA just settled on a tentative deal. I'm not sure if it's actually fully gone through yet or not, but SAG is still on strike, which is the Screen Actors Guild. So, if you guys enjoy the content that we're talking about, and or enjoy just us talking, please do check out the links that are in the description, and consider donating, because as I said, the SAG strike is still going on. Not sure how long that'll be. I'm personally kind of hoping now that the studios have cut a deal with the WGA that things will go a bit smoother at this point, and SAG will get things, they'll get things settled with SAG soon. So,
and if I could, John, also just say a lot of this argument is about AI and making sure that real people are making this content instead of AI generated stories. Humans are storytellers. It's what we do best. And I don't think you can ever fully appreciate art if it's not produced by humans. That's just me. So I don't want my scripts written by AI.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's at the points when, it's hard enough to be asking for originality in Hollywood, but then to have the threat of just taking a bunch of, already written things, putting them in a machine, and then spitting out a new script it's not good. So yeah, the WGA got some protections against that in their deal, and I'm hoping the same goes for SAG as well, amongst a number of other things that they're fighting for. So yeah, support the strikes, people. So yeah, anything you want to mention, Jared, before we plunge back in? And the AR, same goes for you if you're working on anything.
No, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with both of what you have said about supporting the strikes. I was very pleased to see that the WGA got not everything that they wanted, because that never happens in any negotiation, but the essential things that they need to make this profession viable for them going forward. And I'm actually more optimistic now that SAG will manage to secure similar protections that will allow them to continue to, make the art that gives us all so much joy. Because, as AR said, we don't want, AI writing scripts, because I can guarantee you that for a piece of so-called IP like Pirates of the Caribbean, the script that AI would have written for it would not have been this movie, and it would not have been nearly as good. So let's be thankful that we are in a time when we can still celebrate the art and stories told by humans, and in all their weird, beautiful, messy glory.
I'm going to tease you a little bit here, Jared. You think a script written by AI would have been worse than the script for Duel of the Fates?
Oh God! If you ever, like, people seem to think I'm a pretty nice, positive guy, and I am. I try to be. If you ever want to see me get angry, truly angry about something like related to Star Wars, then ply me with a few drinks, say a few glasses of rum, given the Pirates theme today, and ask me about the canceled Episode 9 script Duel of the Fates, because whoo boy do I have thoughts on that festering pile of garbage. And thank God it was canceled and we got the Episode 9 Rise of Skywalker. So I will say that
Which
I feel like a script written by AI would have been much more generic and would not have done the things that script infuriated me. But I still would take a script written by a human. It just probably doesn't speak much of Colin Trevorrow that the idea that I'm even considering such a question. But I really do think that any script written by a human, no matter whether or not it's for me or not, is something that should be celebrated over any kind of script that was written by AI, because ultimately these things need to have a creative soul, and whether or not you agree with the decisions is secondary to that.
Yeah, it's because it takes the art out of art, basically, because if it's it's this argument of are the things we watch art or are they content? And I have no interest in just I already made complaints about certain things from coming out of Hollywood being cookie cutter products, and that it's not going to be, at least in those cases, a human is still writing it. To just have it be an automated thing that comes out of a computer program is just it's really scary to me that that's where we're going, because it's a great thing to ponder in like science fiction stories about how human can artificial intelligence get, but we enjoy those stories because they're stories written written with a human spirit, with a soul behind it. So stories are great, but in real life I don't want I don't want a computer spitting out my stories.
Yeah, at least ChatGPT too also reproduces a lot of white male bias in its production.
Most things do.
Yes. Yeah. But like, to think that AI is perfect, I think is a mistake,
Yeah.
And that it's better than humans, not when it comes to storytelling, and I will die on that hill.
Yeah.
There's a reason that all of the best stories about AI are usually about the so-called artificial intelligence, the machines discovering their humanity rather than the other way around. So let's keep it that way.
Yeah, no, you start letting, like, let's say AI, does like gain the intelligence required to like tell compelling stories, like they would still all be about how human beings discover the true robotic nature within them. It would be the opposite. But yeah, so let's go ahead and dive back into Pirates of the Caribbean. So where did we leave off? We were talking about Norrington, right?
Yes, we were.
So yeah, so we've gone into a lot of like, we've covered some stuff about the sequels, and we've, we started talking about Davy Jones, talking about sequel characters. We get Davy Jones, we get Will's father, but also we get like the most British villain imaginable in what's the character's name? I just know he's
Cutler Beckett.
Lord Beckett, played by Tom Hollander, otherwise known as
Mr. Collins from Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, he'll always be Mr. Collins. But
not Tom Hollander. He's a wonderful actor, but yes, I recommend. It was hard to separate the two characters, especially because these two movies came out so close to one another.
Well, I've always made the joke that, like, I don't know, like, chronologically what comes first, but I always feel like this is Mr. Collins, and like being, you know, reincarnated either forwards or backwards through time to take revenge on Elizabeth for rejecting him. But no, he's great. Like he's always great at playing, you know, let's just put it simply, the British villain. Um, and it always freaks me out when he plays like a normal, like not necessarily a good guy, but like a not bad guy, you know. I think he had a small part as the what do you call it, the prime minister in one of the Mission Impossible movies. And I'm like, no, he's up to something nefarious, which he may still be prime minister, you know. But I think he was supposed to be a relatively straight and narrow guy, which may not be true to real life. But you know, what are you gonna do?
It feels like the actors who play the best villains always seem to be like such gentlemanly and nice people in real life. But obviously that doesn't hold true 100%. But yeah, Mr. Tom Hollander, he does such a wonderful job in the second and third movies because he's very different from the other villains of the series. You know, we start off with, you know, Captain Barbossa, played by the great Jeffrey Rush, who is the quintessential example of what you think a pirate would be, right down to, as you mentioned, John, all the R's and the mateys and the, you know, the underhanded dealings. And obviously Barbossa kind of goes on his own journey and is more of a anti-hero slash heroic character. And yeah,
I do have to say that I went to go see one of my viewings of the first film. I went with a couple of friends from work, one of them being my friend, his name was Silas, and he had the most outrageous, loud cackle you've ever heard. Like the kind of cackle that you're sitting in a movie theater and this person bursts out laughing and everybody's attention in the cinema is drawn towards you. That loud. And I just remember when there were 2 points in this movie where he let that out, and then as a result the audience just laughed even harder because his laugh was so hysterical. And one of them was when Barbossa goes "Arr!" And then the other one was bootstraps, which is hilarious. But yeah, no, great memories. Those are the kind of things that stick out in your mind with like great movie going experiences. The other went with the same friend to go see the movie Signs. That was weird because he was laughing at every like super emotional part of the movie, which just destroyed the experience. But I digress.
Yeah, it's like I love having a good raucous experience in the theater, but there are certain movies that it's better suited to, and I think Pirates is one of them where it's okay to have a crowd that's like laughing and cheering. You know, some of the other movies you kind of want your theater to sit quiet and take it in, but it all comes with the experience. But yeah, in terms of like Barbossa, you know, he's a very over the top villain, but he is, you know, like he's human, even though he has this supernatural curse placed upon him. And then and ultimately he dies and comes back, and he's, you know, a changed character, but not necessarily still a good guy. He just happens to be on the side of right for the second and third movies. And then, of course, the sequels dial up the fantastical with Davy Jones, you know, being this unstoppable supernatural force, in effect, and played by the great Bill Nighy with outstanding, you know, makeup and visual effects work. But what's interesting, and the fourth and fifth movies also kind of involve supernatural villains in Blackbeard and Captain Salazar in For Dead Men Tell No Tales. But what's interesting about Cutler Beckett is he is purely human, like weaselly bureaucracy embodied. But he's still actually like quite nefarious and effective, and he's probably the villain who has like the most success in like stopping our heroes. Like he is the primary antagonist of the third movie because he has Davy Jones effectively under his heel, not happily, but Davy Jones is doing his bidding. And the great triumph of the movie, the third movie, is that he is effectively trying to squash any kind of freedom and individuality and, you know, magic from the world, because he just sees it as a pure engine for his profits and his his own ambitions, which is a familiar thing to anyone who lives in this place called the real world. But you know, and that's the triumph of the movie, is that our heroes are able to defeat him by doing something unexpected and kind of taking him, taking away what he thought he was doing, which was, as in his own words, filling in the blank edges of the map. The immaterial is becoming immaterial, and ultimately it is that kind of magic, unruly element that he's unable to control that does him in. And I kind of feel like, you know, there's that, you know, wonderful scene in the third movie where, you know, Jack and Barbossa come to the island, and they discover the body of the Kraken, which was the great terror of the second movie. You know, very much something we were supposed to fear. And we find out that in between the movies, once Beckett managed to get Davy Jones under his control, he ordered Jones to kill his pet, as he calls it. And, you know, when Jack finds it, you know, this is the beast that killed Jack Sparrow effectively, but he's not like, you know, warding it, you know, the fact that the creature's dead. He's saddened by it because it represents something wild and untamed that he, you know, he longs for in his life. And there's the wonderful scene where Barbossa, you know, is effectively telling him, you know, you can't outrun the world, because Beckett is trying to, you know, effectively make the world a smaller place and turn, you know, and squash any magic out of it. And when Barbossa, you know, kind of wistfully muses like, the world used to be a bigger place, and Jack kind of looks kind of sadly at the slain Kraken, is like, the world's still the same, there's just less in it. And I always love that little moment because it kind of shows the banality of evil, the fact that, you know, Beckett's idea of control is not, you know, holding this supernatural force and unleashing it. He wants to effectively remove it from the world. And like, he uses Jones because he'd use him as a tool, but he treats him like any other underling. And his goal ultimately is to make him into another, just, you know, piece of his, another soldier on his little board that he likes to move his figures around on. And that's what ultimately makes his ending so satisfying, when the, you know, the Black Pearl and the Dutchman blow his ship to hell, and he can't comprehend it because he thought he could control this world, and he just can't.
Yeah. Oh man, and it's funny, we're just talking about you know, AI sort of representing, you know, you know, the sort of you know, the viewpoints of the, you know, white men and all that, and in a movie filled with white men. Yeah, he somehow seems to represent that, you know, tenfold. Just, you know, it's probably just the wig too, but like that power, and he's such a little weasel too, which I think just increases that. But Tom Hollander just plays that so well. but yeah, no, I've always like I find the opening of the third movie really chilling, where all the pirates are being hanged, and and you've got this young boy, which actually adds a whole new. It references back to the first one where Elizabeth says to Will, I was afraid you were going to be hanged for being a pirate, and it's like, oh yeah, they actually would have done that. And yeah, no, but that's a great scene in the opening of the third movie, just because of the way they do it with them singing the pirate song. And I just remember watching that being like, is this a Disney movie or what? It's really dark way to open up, which is to say nothing of all the innuendo throughout these movies. Like I don't know how all this got past Disney's censors, but the whole my compass works fine. Yeah, no. I don't even know where I'm going with now, but yeah, it's just fantastic villains. I think Beckett is, I count him as the most villainous of the characters we get, perhaps because it's the banality of evil. It's and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where I think this movie changes its point of view on pirates, just sort of depending on where it is in the story. In the beginning of, in the first one, the pirates are very scary because our point of view is with Will and Elizabeth as characters who are not part of that world and for whom pirates are the villains. And then, of course, we get to part 3, where they're very much in that world, and Elizabeth becomes the pirate king, and she's surrounded by a table of pirates who really are just a bunch of lovable characters,
including Keith Richards.
Yes.
most lovable of them all.
Which I love, and I think that was even used as a bit of a criticism for the movie when it came out. It's like, since when were the pirates the good guys? But I'm like, well, but it's kind of the point. It's like, this is a Disney movie, and it's like our characters have now joined those ranks. So it's, it's meant to have shifted. Even though that's not, yes, it's not true to life, but again, Disney movie. This is, a fun, supposed to be a fun movie. So.
I think also it has something that George R. R. Martin, if he were here, would say that the human heart in conflict with itself is makes the most interesting story. And you have this, all 3 of our main characters are in conflict with themselves for one reason or another. Will with his father, he has this conflict between his love for Elizabeth and his loyalty as a son. And then you have Elizabeth, right? Her loyalties to kind of her father and what they want for her versus what her heart wants, which is, to be a pirate king. Anyway, and then you have, of course, Jack Sparrow. His selfish heart is what he's constantly in conflict with, right? And that he sort of in the back of his mind does crave being a good person, and yet is having a hard time with being able to get beyond his own bad habits. And so all 3 of them are in conflict with themselves. And I think the magical element really sets the tone for the human experience being beyond what we can really comprehend. And I think also you just think of how the movie viscerally makes you feel. It just has this style to it. When you think of Davy Jones playing the organ, I had squid from Korean barbecue a couple days ago. So I'm like, or a couple weeks ago. So I'm kind of like, oh, okay. It's, it always has creeped me out, but you have these images and these characters that just continue to last and continue to have an impact on us. And I think that's because they all were constantly in conflict in some way with their own desires and with their own wants and with their own path.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you framed it that way, because it, a lot of times we think about like the best villains are the ones who think they're the heroes, or the villains are kind of the reflection of the heroes. And that same conflict of like the human heart in conflict with itself is echoed in the villain of the second and third movies of Davy Jones, because his idea is that he is kind of torn between the duty that he was charged with and his love for this woman. And when he suffers a betrayal, how does he get around that conflict? He literally carves his heart out of his body, and he ends up, because he's trying to avoid that pain, he's trying to avoid that conflict, and it ultimately, makes him a monster, because he truly, he can't separate himself from that. And that's, we've mentioned that, Beckett is kind of the most nefarious of the villains. It's, he seems to be not in conflict. He has a very clear idea of what he wants. We don't really see him have an arc, but Davy Jones is very much a tragic character, because he was once human, and his choice to try to, resolve that conflict was to sacrifice his humanity. And that's why, when he finally, comes face to face with the woman he loved and in his mind betrayed him in Calypso, he can't forgive her. And it ultimately costs him, everything. So I find that to be a very interesting parallel as well, that makes the second and third movie stronger.
Yeah, and that idea of sacrifice too kind of comes out, right? Sacrificing oneself, sacrificing your feelings, right? To kind of give them away, making sacrifice, to be together or to not be together, with Elizabeth Swann and I'm totally blanking on Orlando Bloom's name in this.
Will
Turner. Okay, there we go. Their hearts being in conflict with each other too is just, I think, what creates that perfect triangle of these three characters who are, for good or for worse, they're important to each other, right? And I think that in the end, what this movie shows is that relationships are what's important, right? Even though they're dirty pirates, right? They can still love, and they can still care for other people. And I think that's like a lot in the heart of these movies, is caring for other people and doing what you can as an individual and trying in some way to do something when you're called upon.
Yeah, and and it's funny, we're talking about these characters and sacrifices and that they made for each other, and I was just thinking about the fact that really, I said before that Jack kind of is the same at the beginning as he is at the end. That's not completely true, because actually by the end of the third movie he makes a decision that is entirely selfless, because he's all about Jack wants that immortality, so he's gonna even though he's a bit conflicted about it, because he doesn't necessarily he says tentacles really aren't for me, but he is thinking about the immortality, but he gives that up for Will, and so that is a changed Jack who would not have made that decision at the beginning of the story. So
and give it up to a Disney movie. One of the common themes is death in these movies too. I mean, that's just another thing that surprises me, that it's a Disney franchise, is that mortality and immortality. Like, when you talk about being immortal, you have to recognize your own mortality as a reality. And so I just find that interesting, that it really took a lot of adult themes and made, a franchise that kids liked, right? And if I could also just say a little bit about the music, is that how iconic it is that when I was in orchestra, and anytime we'd get break, instead of break and like not playing our instruments, we would always play Pirates. together. And that would always like get everyone like nice and warmed up and get us like in a good mood because it's such a jaunty tune. Oh, I better not sing too much or else. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not good enough for YouTube censors to pick that up. But I think that the strings especially get to me. It's a very short staccato kind of playful tune that goes against your expectations in its musicality, just like the movie goes against your expectations for cinema and for pirate movies in general.
Yeah, it's funny. I do want to say about the music, because originally the composer for the first film was Alan Silvestri, who is a very, we would have gotten a very classical style score out of him that probably would have skewed more towards like, pirate movies of old. But then of course, I think it was Jerry Bruckheimer came in who was like, no, this movie needs a certain sound, bring in someone from Hans Zimmer's Academy of Film Composers. And so we got really, when you bring in any one of those people, in this case, it was, I don't know if I'm getting his name right, Klaus Badelt, even though his name is on it, you're really getting kind of a bunch of composers, including Hans Zimmer himself, because that's just the way that, that system kind of works. And so what we get is very much, it feels like a Jerry Bruckheimer action movie in the music. But it's exactly what the movie needed. And I think even throughout the second and third movies, the score kind of grows. It's got its own unique sound. I talked about it sounding like a Jerry Bruckheimer action movie, but then you get to part 3 and you got like the Will and Elizabeth love theme that flourishes in part 3. And that's so beautifully orchestral. And then you've also got the, I don't know what the theme would be called. It's the theme you first get at the beginning of the third film when the pirates are singing the song and being hanged, and it comes back when Elizabeth is giving her big speech to all the pirates, and it's so gorgeous what develops with these themes over the course of the movies, and then it's one of those movies that I always remember walking out of the cinema for each of the films, because it ends on this big high note and then goes out on that main theme. I can't hum it, but the big, main Pirates of the Caribbean theme. Just the fact that the first movie ends with Jack doing the yo-ho song, and then closes the compass, and then it cuts right to the music.
Which is one of my favorite cuts to black of any movie ever.
Oh yeah. And it's just like, it's so much fun. Like you want to end. I think it's such an underrated thing, ending movies on like an adrenaline rush. Not just like having an adrenaline rush for your final act and then closing out the movie, but making sure that when those credits roll, the audience is super pumped and excited. And these movies do that so wonderfully. And even like the third or the second movie, when Barbossa is reintroduced, and what's his line? I'm trying to remember what it is exactly. So what's become of my ship? And then the monkey, makes his little noise, and then he does his laugh, bites from the apple, cut to credits, the music, and it's like, oh my God, can't wait for the third movie. Barbossa's back. It's just like, that's so important to do that, especially for movies like these. And yeah, I just think it's done beautifully. The music is such a huge part of why these movies are so much fun.
One movie that had a really good cut to black is also, or cut to the screen is also Barbie, I would say. Right at the end, she has a one-liner, and it ends the movie on a really funny and silly high note.
Yes. No, I love that too. I'm actually glad you mentioned Barbie because I weirdly think there's kind of a parallel between these two movies because
I can't wait to hear.
No, it's just the fact that Pirates of the Caribbean is one of the reasons people were thinking it was going to be a flop and like, oh God, why is Disney doing this? Is because it was based on a theme park ride,
Yeah.
And Barbie is based on a doll. And so people naturally, cynically thought that, oh, this is just a company that's making a movie based on a property that they own, looking to make a quick buck, and it's going to be, kind of hacky and, soulless. And if it was written by AI, perhaps it would be. But part of the reason both those movies are so tremendously successful is because even though they use the IP as like the branding and the name, they tell a wholly original story. Yes, like I guess Pirates kind of loosely follows and incorporates some of the elements from the theme park ride, but Jack, Will, and Elizabeth are completely original characters. And I believe Jack has since been incorporated back into the ride, but they took the concept and they told their own story. They kind of Trojan horsed it. Same with Barbie. Greta Gerwig was given the opportunity to make that movie, and she used it kind of as a vehicle to tell an original story, using those trappings. And that's the way to do it. That's why those movies are so creatively and ultimately financially successful.
I will say though, my preferred cut in that movie is, and this is predictable because really it's based off of another famous cut, which is the opening of the movie when it cuts from the baby doll flying in the air to the title in the 2001 homage.
Yeah.
Which I was just laughing throughout that whole sequence because I was so happy.
Both are an homage to previous cinema, and both have themes of death and existentialism in them. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
You should do a Pirates and then Barbie marathon.
Yep. And it's funnily enough because there were rumors that they were going to reboot the Pirates franchise with Margot Robbie as the lead. I don't believe that's happening anymore, but would have been another connection.
Yet another parallel.
Which, but I think you guys would be with me on this. Like, if you want to do Pirates with, a female lead, you already have a female lead. And that's Keira Knightley. So, but yeah, okay. So, we were talking about the music, and yeah, so the music is fantastic. I will say, I remember when the movie came out, the soundtrack didn't get released for a couple weeks after the movie premiered, and so I was dying. You guys know me with movie music, and what's funny is the soundtrack album for the original movie is actually rather short. It's only about 35 to 40 minutes long. And the music isn't even mixed that great. It's a little on the loud side, but I didn't care. I remember I picked that up at probably like Best Buy or something, and drove my dad crazy because, of course, I think we were out together that day, and I immediately threw it in the CD player in the car, and I was just happy as can be. But yeah, how times change. Now we just get online and download that
YouTube
music.
it and or download it. Yeah.
Yeah. But so we and there's nothing saying we have to stop, but we do have 15 minutes left to the 2-hour mark. There's lots to talk about these movies, but was there any thing especially you guys wanted to highlight as we get close to wrapping up?
I just want to take a second to celebrate kind of the romance between Will and Elizabeth, because that really is kind of the magic and a consistent through line throughout those movies. You know, they like we have these two characters who are, yes, very conventionally attractive, and they are the kind of the impetus for the plot definitely in the first movie, because they, you know, they're separated, they want to be reunited. And throughout, and even though the storyline, you know, the stories of the second and third movies kind of become a little bit more complex, like those two characters really, like the fact that they end up having this very classically beautiful love story, but there is still room for them to also have other stories alongside it. Will with his father, Elizabeth with her kind of quest for self-determination. That's so powerful and unfortunately kind of rare. Like, I feel like in, you know, for a long time, it was the love story was the only thing that, you know, that was the core of most Disney movies, was the princess and the prince. You know, they're going to get together and live happily ever after at the end. And as we've kind of evolved more in society with, you know, women getting more opportunities for, you know, kind of self-determining and, you know, powerful roles in their own right, I feel like a lot of franchises have almost gone the other way of like, well, in order for a woman to be powerful and self-determining, that means she can't have a love interest, or like, or the guy, like, you know, same for the male thing, you know, counterpart. Like, there have been a lot of Disney animated movies recently, which is a totally fine creative choice, but there's no love story. But what's great about these movies is that there is a love story, and it's an epic love story that really kind of makes your heart sing and takes you on these incredible highs. In particular, you know, at the end of the third movie, when Will and Elizabeth get married on the deck of the ship in the middle of the maelstrom, and they have this sweeping moment where they, you know, have this kiss, like that. That's just such a thrilling moment, and it feels so earned.
And the music, again, bringing up the music, it was so beautiful.
Yeah, but we care this much because we care about Will and Elizabeth as people. It's not just like, oh, we want the hot girl and the hot guy to make out at the end of the movie, although that is an appeal of it as well. It's that we know that Will and Elizabeth have loved each other since they were, you know, 12 years old at the very beginning of the movie, and now they finally get to be together, and then it's cruelly kind of almost entirely snatched away when Davy Jones stabs Will through the heart, and we fear he might be lost. But then when Jack makes that sacrifice to allow Will to kill Jones and become the captain of the Flying Dutchman, and we kind of have this dynamic at the end where, you know, Will and Elizabeth are going to be able to be together, but they're going to have to be separated for 10 years for him to do the duty of carrying the souls to the next world. But that scene at the end at World's End, where they share their one day together, and you know, they essentially have the love of a lifetime in the span of a single day. It's so beautiful, accompanied by that theme. I believe it's called One Day. And, you know, at the end, when Will like hands her the chest containing his heart and says, "It's always belonged to you. Will you keep it safe?" And she just kind of says quietly, "Yes, yes." And then, of course, he goes to the sea and she can't let him go, and she runs after him. And it's just, but, you know, and then at the end, after they kiss, and he's like, "Keep a weather eye on the horizon," and he disappears. And it's incredibly bittersweet. It's almost the definition of bittersweet, but eased by the post-credit scene where you see he comes back and is reunited with her in the sun. But it's such a well-earned like romance that it's shocking how like rare it is for movies to replicate that alchemy. And whether it's the writing, it's the performances, it's the direction, everything about it is just beautiful and like pure and human. And honestly, it's a miracle how they managed to tell a love story this rich between two characters who feel this well realized. And and it means that a scene like that just makes your heart like want to soar.
Yeah, and it's interesting that to note the timing of all this for me as a cinema lover, because when the first one came out, I think like deep down I was very much like a romantic person, but I hadn't yet gotten to that point where I was willing to just wave my flag of please give me the romance. But by the time the sequels had come out, I had like Pride and Prejudice had come out, and At World's End came out the same year that Atonement did. And so by this point, I was like, give me these, beautiful, even tragic romances, especially featuring Keira. Like I am here for this, so that when we get to the end of At World's End, I'm just like a mess. And and like so emotionally invested in it. So yeah, it's beautiful. And I brought up before about the music, which they made a whole new theme for Elizabeth and Will for the third film, which is just like just soaring music that is just like as romantic as you can imagine. And yeah, I always chuckle a bit with when he says will you keep it safe, and she's like yes, and then when she runs after him, she just sets it up on the rock and it's kind of shaky back and forth. It's like, please do a better job than that. But no, it's just an incredibly beautiful scene. And then it's heartbreaking just to then get that, like, it's, for my money, it's the best after credits sequence there's ever been, because it's not teasing something to come. It really is an emotional resolution for their story. Again, keeping out movies that were yet to come. Just the fact that it's been 10 years and she's standing there on the on the cliff, or the shore, waiting for him with their son, and then the green flash and he appears, and then it fades to black. It's incredibly bittersweet, but it's also a happy note to end on, and just incredibly beautiful. And that's what I was talking about before. They could have easily made this a series where, and they kind of eventually did, where it's, the next adventure for Captain Jack Sparrow, but instead they transformed it into this beautiful larger story where the center of it is this heart-achingly beautiful love story. And and I think it works great. So yeah.
No, just wanted to make sure I got that in there, because I would have felt it remiss if we didn't. This is the Knights of Keira stream, and this is this is a central part of the Elizabeth character and why she is the incredible heroine that she is. Also, shout out to her incredible Hoist the Colors speech after she becomes the Pirate King, which similarly is one of the most rousing moments I've ever seen in the cinema. And it's the culmination of her character arc of self-determination. The fact that the former governor's daughter is now leading the armada of the free pirate ships against the the forces of the old world, as it were. So I find it just incredibly amazing to watch and see like how none of them question it. They all look to her in that moment, and she like ultimately leads them. In a similar vein of you mentioning the kind of amusing how Elizabeth has this incredibly tender moment with Will and then sets his heart on the side. I do find it more than a little amusing that she gives this incredibly rousing speech about we will like fight as the armies of freedom against this great armada, and then it ends up being one ship against one ship, and the rest of the pirates and the rest of the East India trips sit back and do fuck all, and then they're cheering at the end. Like, I'm like, what did you guys do? But I get it. They were trying to save a little bit of money because the actual battle between the Black Pearl and the Flying Dutchman in the middle of the flying, maelstrom is incredibly epic. And they, I didn't need them to like have, but they could have like showed the other ships fighting in the background.
Yeah, no, that has always been a bit humorous. Yeah, no, I've said this before, but I love the fact that there was a post Lord of the Rings, there was this big swell of like every studio being like, we need to make our own epic movie, and and you had a lot of these actors trying to do the the Aragorn thing, or even the Russell Crowe thing from Gladiator, of giving like these rousing speeches, and a lot of them kind of came up short. And even poor Orlando Bloom in Kingdom of Heaven, because that movie got butchered in its theatrical release. So a lot of them felt kind of undercooked, from Brad Pitt to poor Colin Farrell, Alexander. And then we get Pirates 3, and Keira just sweeps the floor with all of them and gives this amazing, big, rousing speech. And you're sitting in the theater, you're like, that's how you do it. Yeah, and that was amazing. How about you, AR? Any things you want to make sure we talk about?
I think we covered it really well, and I especially appreciated Jared's kind of view on the love story, which I've gotten better, but I have been like not as invested in the love story parts of movies, but I definitely have become more interested in that, and I've become more interested in kind of the power of love and what it can do to kind of bring about good things in the world. And so I think in the end, if you look at it as a hopeful story of love between these two people, then it kind of shows you that it's more than just a fun, silly pirate movie.
Well said.
Yeah, that's okay, because I more than make up.
Yes,
for
all the
it's give me all that stuff all day long. I am the hopeless romantic, so I definitely, I know when we when you were my co-host on here, AR, it was I'm more than made up for if you weren't if you were into other elements of the movie other than the love story, that's okay. I was there to pick up the slack. And
definitely.
Yeah, and now I'm just going to use these last couple minutes to make sure I go ahead and throw some pictures up there, which I gotta go ahead and throw in Jack and Elizabeth's scene in Dead Man's Chest, where she's kind of toying with them a bit, and some great screenshots here. But no, she I love her look here, where it's like Dead Man's Chest is sort of the in-between stage for Elizabeth, where she's not the pirate king yet, but she's she's definitely got the pirate garb going on. And that's one thing that I feel probably we just took for granted and didn't talk especially about, which is that the costume design in these films is like off the charts amazing, and you know, every level of the production, really, they did such a fantastic job. Yeah,
everything about these movies is just so immaculately well crafted, you know, because it all part of the reason it still holds up 20 years later is because it feels so real and so tangible, you know, all the costumes, all the makeup work, all the production design, you know, the fact that they shot a lot of this on location, you know, it's, you know, that's another reason there was such a huge risk, but they didn't like skimp. They didn't try to cut corners. They like recognized that this was a story that needed to be told with an epic scope, even if they, you know, were going to, you know, give it a little bit of an edge that hadn't been seen before, namely in the form of how funny it is. Like that's something I feel like we haven't quite talked about as much, is just how funny these movies are. And a lot of that embodied by the one character I just want to shout out very quickly because we haven't mentioned him is Gibbs. You know, Kevin McNally, who's the one who, other than Jack and Barbossa, is the only character who appears in all five, and he just has some of the best one-liners and humorous moments. But they all do. Like they're like I feel like a lot of people think most of the humor comes from Jack and Gibbs and like Pintel and Rigetti, and it does, but like even the so-called quote unquote like straight men characters like Will and Elizabeth and Norrington, they all have moments where they're just hilarious, whether it's their facial acting or like the quips that they make. It's like every single character in this movie like has those moments that make them feel like they're, you know, they're in these crazy situations where they're reacting to these wild characters, and they all have like very humorous reactions. Like I think about the moment where Norrington like picks up, he's surrounded by the pirates and the Davy Jones pirates in Dead Man's Chest, and they're like, we will pry it from your cold dead hand. He's like, here you go, and then throws it at them. Or, you know, or Will, like Orlando Bloom makes some like great facial expressions to just sum up like these, like when Gibbs is telling like his wacky stories, and you think Will is just standing there, but you actually look at his face, he's actually like making all these kind of like funny reactions to everything that he's seeing. And then of course Keira Knightley's comic timing for some of these things is just fantastic.
Yes. Another thing I was just thinking of, like even a character like Beckett, there's this scene where he and Jack are negotiating in the middle of the movie on the ship, and it's as the scene is wrapping up, and Jack says, you know, you may kill me, but you may never insult me. Who am I? And Beckett goes like, and then he goes, I'm Captain Jack Sparrow.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, even a character like that is allowed to have like a funny reaction shot, and the humor is just so great. It's my love for these movies is just and never ending, and now I'm all psyched up to go ahead and watch parts 2 and 3 after we've been talking about the whole trilogy. So
yeah, I'll do my homework after it's due. Was what I was doing this time. But I'm a teacher, so it's kind of ironic. But I appreciate the students that are honest and tell me they didn't do the homework instead of trying to like create BS about it. So I was honest with y'all.
I think we were still okay because we've all seen these movies at least
more than once. Yeah.
So trying to think of, I feel like there was something else that I wanted to mention, but now I'm gonna forget it. That's okay. But so I love these movies. You know, still in disbelief that it's the 20th anniversary of part one, and I feel old because I know all our ages are different, so your mileage may vary, but the thought that this movie is now older than I was when it came out. I was 19 years old when I saw this film, so that just freaks me out a bit. But but here we are, and but I'm so glad that I still love these movies as much as when they came out, and in some cases I'd say my opinion of parts 2 and 3 have even gone up since they came out, because I think maybe I was a bit more critical of them when they first came out, just because, like you said, Jared, the first one was such a home run that I think you expect parts 2 and 3 to be as much of a home run, but that was impossible because there was so much like spontaneity at play with that first one, like the fact that it wasn't written with Johnny Depp doing whatever it was he was doing in mind. So, so there was a bit of chaos that sprung from that. And it just turned out beautifully. And then the fact that I think that's part of the reason why maybe, I don't think his, like, the Jack Sparrow character ever worked as well as it did in the first one. I just think it's absolute magic. And I think part of that is because then afterwards they went ahead and they wrote to that, but you can't write that genius that, that he came up with on, with that character. So I think that's part of the reason why there's a little bit of a struggle with that, but still, I love the whole trilogy, and people may notice we didn't really talk about the fourth and fifth films. I think there's a reason for that, but as far as
there is some decent stuff in there, but there's also some really bad stuff. And I think part of the reason we're not doing it as much is because after the fourth and fifth movie, we talked about how perfect the kind of the triumvirate are. Will and Elizabeth are not in the fourth movie at all. They only appear in the fifth movie at the very end, and they kind of try to create new characters for Jack to bounce off of, and none of them really have the same impact. Although I will say I do like Penelope Cruz's performance in the fourth one. I think that, not just because she's Penelope Cruz, but I actually do think there's more there. But they're, for instance, like in the fifth one, they kind of have Will and Elizabeth's son, Henry Turner, and Kaya Scoladero's Karina Smith, who's revealed to be Barbosa's daughter. They try to give them those roles. And in the fourth one, I think it's this priest played by Sam Claflin and this mermaid named Serena. And like, they don't have the same magic. So I don't I don't want to dismiss them out of hand. I just feel like, they clearly were, especially by the end, you feel like even Johnny Depp's heart isn't in it as much. So they don't have the same magic that the first three do, at least for me.
Yeah, I think that was definitely my feeling with the fifth one, was that I remember watching it being like, this feels like he's phoning this in, which, I hate to use that expression, but but it just didn't feel like he was, he was into it. And yeah, when you brought these characters in who are ostensibly trying to fill that Will and Elizabeth role, it's like, why can't we just have Will and Elizabeth? So yeah. But the first three still remain like my favorite, some of my favorite movies of all time, and the first one especially is just as classic as you can get. I think it's like one of those quintessential, popcorn blockbuster movies that I'm sure there's flaws, in it, but it's one of those movies where you don't really care because it's so much fun that it kind of, it feels like it belongs in the ranks of movies like, it's the same kind of vibe that Mask of Zorro gives me, where it's just that really fun, escapist entertainment. So, yeah.
And historically, we needed that in 2003 as well.
Yeah. Oh, that was the other thing I was going to say. The only thing that's like, that, not in a, like, not seriously, but kind of pulls me out is whenever I hear that line in the movie where, Pintel and Rigetti are going back and forth, and he's like, down to the depths, whatever madmen came up with parlay. And then Jack responds, that'll be the French. I just remember that came at the height of the freedom fries stuff and all that. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Oh, it's really is amazing, because you watch movies and you're like, oh man, it feels like no time has passed at all. But then you remember something like that and you're like, oh God, it's been forever since this came out. But yeah, so thank you guys for joining me for this today. It was great to go down memory lane, and especially great to have the three of us together to talk about this. I'm always game to talk about pirates, and especially, of course, Keira Knightley. So just wrapping up, and just just to mention once again that next week will be Jared and I will be doing the final discussion for season 1 of Ahsoka, which I'm just so pumped for this last episode, but I'm also like, I'm bummed because it is going to be the last episode and we're going to have to wait to see what happens next. But I'm excited to see where they leave things off for us. And crossing my fingers that some predictions I made for the final episode don't come true, because I've got some bad feelings. No pun intended. To really drive that pun home, I just should have said, I have a bad feeling about this. There, I've done it. But yeah, so, and then after that, I think we kind of have to talk about what we're going to stream about after that, because I know I'm going to be going on vacation for a couple of weeks at some point. And then when we come back, I think on November 4th, we're going to be doing a stream about Sleepy Hollow for a couple days late Halloween stream. So, and I know that Trish already said she wants to come on with us to talk about that, so that'll be a lot of fun.
That'll be a great stream.
Yeah. So yeah, anything you guys want to mention before we wrap up?
No, my limit has been reached long ago, so
I want to thank you, AR, for for joining us. We really wanted to do this stream, with you, because we know how much you love this movie and these characters, and it wouldn't have felt right to do it without you. So I'm glad that it worked out, and also for keeping us on time, because John and I have, been rambling a bit on our previous streams, going like 2.5 to 3 hours. And so this one's going to be a little bit shorter. And I think it's, because you're here to keep us in line.
Yeah. Next week, God help us.
Yeah, keep going. You guys can go without me, but I told John, like, straight up, I was like, 2 hours is my limit. Like, I really can't, like, I have to stand up and walk around and do something that's not staring at my screen. So yeah, and now that I've gotten back into teaching, I haven't been having to stare at my screen all day. And so this is like making my eyes very tired.
Yeah. Well, give them a rest then.
Yes, definitely.
So yeah, looks like, I don't know if we have anybody who's still watching, but for people who come back to watch later, thank you for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful night, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Take care. Hoist the colors.